فلا تعتدوها وحرم أشياء فلا تنتهكوها وسكت عن أشياء رحمة لكم غير نسيان فلا تبحثوا عنها. حديث حسن رواه الدارقطني وغيره. The translation of the meaning, inshallah. Hadith number 30. On the authority of Abu Tha'laba al-Khushni Jurthum ibn Nashir, may Allah be pleased with him, who narrated that the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Indeed, Allah has made obligations obligatory, so do not waste them. And He has defined limits, so do not transgress them. And He has forbidden some things, so do not violate them. He was silent about some things as a mercy to you, not out of forgetfulness, so do not investigate them." This is a hadith that has a classification of going Hasan or good, narrated by Darqutni and others. First of all, it should be mentioned that the chain of this hadith has some discussion about it. Inshallah, if you're a student of Mustalah, you can read about more detail. But remember that the classification of hadith is an issue of scholarly discussion. So this particular hadith, some scholars have found some weakness in the chain. Remember we said the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, which are about 42, have roughly 4 hadith which are not at the same level of strength and authenticity as the others, and this is one with which there is discussion about the chain. Remember we said, inshallah, on the issues of aqidah, creed, fiqh, is extremely strict on the strength of the hadith. And so nothing but the strongest hadith are used to formulate these, because these are the core of the deen. On things that are fada'il, good deed, or things that are supported by others, there is some ulama still don't allow narration of a weak hadith, but others allow it on the condition that you identify it. Remember, this is a key piece of kind of the credibility of you as transmitting and teaching, but also of the hadith itself. And so, inshallah, I mentioned that to you so that you're aware and out of transparency. But the concepts of the hadith are related in other hadith as well, so the meaning, inshallah, has strength, and we'll talk about it briefly for that reason. There are 4 types of deeds mentioned here. What's the first type of deed? The fara'id, right? The obligations. It'll come in a later hadith that actually no one draws near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with anything that is more beloved to Him than the obligatory actions. So the hadith starts by saying that these things have been made obligatory, so don't let them go to waste. Don't miss out on them. And this seems extraordinarily extraordinarily obvious, but when we reflect on our own practice and many things we observe around us, in fact, many times this is not applied in the life of a Muslim, because we sometimes do not orient our priorities around what the deen has prioritized. So part of this hadith, and a hadith that's coming a couple of hadith from now as well, more than one actually, is seeing good and bad, seeing important and less important, seeing urgent and less urgent through the lens of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. What Allah has brought forward, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prioritized, what Allah has made important. This doesn't mean that we may not have our individual hobbies. This doesn't mean that we may have our individual focuses. This doesn't mean that down to a level of details that there are differences in our practice. It's all fine. But at the end of the day, are your prayers jammed into your day, or is your day planned around your prayers? Your prayers get jammed into your day after it's already set, or is your day planned around that I have this obligation? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has invited me and commanded me to connect with Him at least these 5 times. How many hours are there in a week? I actually don't know the answer to this, so you really do have to wake up and answer it. How many hours are there in 7 days?
24 times 7.
No, it's 24 times 7. There are 24 hours in a day, right? These types of things become very ambiguous, by the way, early in the morning. Saying, are there 7 days in a week? Are there 24 hours? Okay, now what's 24 times 7? 168. I remember an imam actually in Salatul Jummah when I was a student. So he asked us this question during Jummah, and we're trying to hold back our laughs. He said there's 168 hours. So you have 167 hours, more actually, to figure out how to orient yourself to be present and on time at next Salatul Jummah. It's like, wow. Because we're not sugarcoating it. We're not shaming each other. Especially in the West, Salatul Jummah is not by default. It's not easy. It takes sacrifice. And we're orienting ourselves, inshallah, around the next 167 hours. How do I make the sacrifices and invest the time to be there, inshallah, timely and early, inshallah? This is a statement of what's important in our lives. And understand that in this element is very different from power and authority, is very different from money and wealth. Not everyone is given the same amount of wealth with which to make a difference. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us about what we have been given. Not everyone has the same amount of authority. So those that have more are asked about more, but everyone is asked about their responsibility. But time is a zero-sum game. Meaning that when you say you don't have time, ultimately, and I'm talking to myself before anybody else, we have to confront our excuses. Because the reality is each of us woke up with the same 24 hours available today. If Allah has given you the day, then He has given you the same amount of time as anyone else. So how we invest our time is a reflection of what's actually important to us. What time we make for our prayers is for our acts of worship is a reflection of how our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reflects in our deeds, in our works. And remember, it's faith and works. It's iman and what? Amal salih. So this is a direct reflection of the importance of this connection in terms of our deeds. You with me? Hadith of Salam, radiallahu anhu, there's several ahadith that talk about similar meanings. And a number of these ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, so give each their due right. Right? Give each party their due right. In the hadith of Salman, he talks about three things. Anybody know? Talks about the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He talks about the rights of the family. He talks about the rights of oneself. And really these three are a reflection of those things that follow us all to the deathbed. In other ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ speaks about different or complementary or additional things, right? And so we have additional responsibilities. And so some of these other additional ahadith complement and complete this meaning. But, and I know this is a challenge, and I'm identifying it because it's a challenge. I'm identifying it because I'm trying to teach myself. For many of our community servants, for many of our teachers, for many of our big brothers, big sisters, for many of our students, for many of our MSA activists, we are inadvertently taught that it's okay to get the next event, to get the next action, get the next whatever done at the expense of one's family obligations. And that is not only backwards, it is not only wrong, it is absolutely positively un-Islamic. It is unsupported by the Islamic texts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nar. O you who believe, protect and save yourselves and your families from a fire till the end of the verse. So here, even as the rest of the Quran calls us to awareness of the Ummah and others, there is a clear prioritization and a clear order. And ultimately that order starts with oneself. Doesn't mean that a person cannot, as we'll come to, enjoying good, forbid evil if they're not a perfect person. That's not the meaning. But it means that my primary and first consideration is my own spiritual development, my own relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I should not become so preoccupied with serving or developing others as to neglect my own spiritual wellness. So all of these are just a reflection, a part of the meaning of this, the prioritization to make the obligations, so do not let them go to waste. Then the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah has set limits. Do not transgress them. Multiple times in the Quran al-Kareem, this comes in the ayat of the Quran al-Kareem, وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ. These are the boundaries, the limits of Allah. And in some verses, وَمَن يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. Whomever transgresses the limits of Allah, they have harmed their own selves. In other verses, do not come close to the limits of Allah. Another verse, do not cross the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this issue of hududullah, or the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a Quranic concept that is emphasized, or reiterated, I should say, in this hadith. This part of the hadith is very connected to another hadith of the collection of Imam al-Nawawi, which we have discussed. Who can remember which hadith? This part about the limits of Allah is very related to an example given in an earlier hadith. Yes. So the hadith is discussing that the halal is clear and the haram is clear. Okay? And also the example of, remember the sanctuary that a person tending their flock right at the edge, yushik, that he was about to violate it, to enter it. So here we've spoken about that in detail, so I'm keeping the commentary brief here because you have it earlier in your notes, inshallah. And then the hadith continues that Allah has made certain things forbidden, so do not violate them. And this is again a reiteration of the sanctity of the haram or the forbidden. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we've spoken about before, has not forbidden something except that it is for our benefit, has not obligated something except that it is for our benefit. That the haram is not just, it is to test, but it also brings benefit in this life and the next. The end of the hadith, we've never seen in this collection yet, this particular wording or phrasing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was silent about some things as a mercy to you, not out of forgetfulness, so do not investigate them. This actually has multiple different interpretations, and the interpretations complement one another. Some of it talks about the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءٍ إِن تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ. O you who believe, do not ask about things. If it is made plain to you, it will harm you. And if it is made and if you ask about it while the Quran is being revealed, it would be made plain to you when Allah has let it go, has pardoned it. So the immediate application of this was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions were forbidden from asking about things about the Quran and Sunnah. It had not yet been revealed in the Quran and Sunnah, because remember, this is being revealed progressively. They're receiving the Quran bit by bit. And so there was a trust of Allah and a trust of His Messenger. That, for example, remember the early Muslims, they didn't have Hajj as an obligation or as a possibility, right? The early Muslims, they did not have fasting until a couple years into the Medinan timeline. So they did not approach the Prophet ﷺ, when are we gonna do this? What about this? What about that? many things of legislation, even alcohol, prohibited progressively, right? The forbiddance of adultery, fornication, all of these things came during time. So the companions had an unmatched respect of this timeline and order from the Prophet ﷺ. But there's a broader meaning here as well, as many scholars comment, that extends to our time, which has to do with our manners of questioning. Remember, we said, if a person is entering into a responsibility, they're looking to get married, they need to learn the rights and responsibilities of marriage. Don't apply this hadith, say, oh, I didn't ask, I don't know, I'm not accountable. No, there you have to be. If you're going to enter a line of work, if you're going to open a business, if you're going to enter a position of responsibility, all of these you need to go seek that knowledge. It goes from recommended to obligatory in your case, because you're entering a responsibility for it. But you really get some of the spirit of this hadith when you look at some of our questions in our gatherings, in our conferences, and this is not to discourage questions. Questions are some of the most powerful tools of learning. But how many times do we get theoretical bickering about things when somebody's going hungry next door? How many times have we seen when there's a clear stand for justice, theoretical nonsense going back and forth in a gap? How many times do we see the story of Surah Al-Kahf, or the story of Surah Yusuf, or the story of these great stories of the Quran, and we want to go after the pieces that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left ambiguous? Oh, what's her name? What's this? What's that? Instead of seeing, look at these people standing for social justice, look at this courage, look at this sacrifice, we're focused on, did they get married? How many were there? Oh, were they 3 or 4? And which one was the daughter? All the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not prioritizing, is not focusing on in Al-Quran Al-Karim and in the religious texts. So part of this also, and this comes in the other hadith, that no one, that this deen is deep, right? It is intricate. Nobody overburdens themselves, becomes overzealous with the deen, except that it overcomes them, right? And so a person has to be gradual and disciplined, inshallah, in their development and their knowledge. Inshallah, if there's any questions on this hadith, I'm going to ask you to hold on to them, because we're going to take one more hadith. These are short, and then I'll pause, inshallah, for questions. عن أبي العباس سهل بن سعد الساعدي رضي الله عنه قال جاء رجل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله دلني على عمل إذا عملته أحبني الله وأحبني الناس فقال ازهد في الدنيا يحبك الله وازهد فيما عند الناس يحبك الناس رواه ابن ماجه وغيره بأسانيد حسنة. This hadith is narrated by Abu al-Abbas Sahl ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi. May Allah be pleased with him, who said, a man came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, who said, the man said, O Messenger of Allah, show me an action which if I do it, Allah will love me and people will love me. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, do without the world. We're going to define this term in a second, but have zuhd with respect to the world, which can be translated as do without the world, or be aloof of the world, or asceticism. There's no English translation. So have zuhd with respect to the world, and Allah will love you. And have zuhd with that which people have, and people will love you. This hadith talks about an Islamic concept, which is the concept of zuhd. Zuhd, Z-U-H-D, zuhd. The closest English translation is asceticism, A-S-C-E-T. What's the rest of the word? See, I didn't do well in spelling being honest, well, I apologize. But let's understand the term for what it means from an Islamic concept. Again, this hadith has some discussion about its chain. It is not as strong as the other hadith. A number of scholars have classified it as a weak hadith, yet the concept of zuhd is well established in Al-Islam, but is often mispracticed or poorly understood, including in some places in the Muslim world. Az-zuhd can simply be translated as carrying the dunya, as one person says, in one's hand and not in one's heart. Another definition is leaving that of the world, meaning dunya, money, wealth, possessions, everything, stuff. Leaving that of the world for which one has no need, even if it's halal, and to suffice with basically what is sufficient. To be satisfied with what's sufficient, even if one can acquire through halal means more. And the zuhd was praised and was practiced by many of the pious predecessors because it is essentially additional caution with respect to the dunya, and it puts a person more in control of their emotional state, right? Because they become less preoccupied with the acquisition of more and more and more, and more preoccupied with the concern for al-akhirah. The poet says, be one who does without that which people's hands possess, you will become beloved to all of mankind. Similar to Hadith. Right? That with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when a person is disattached from the dunya, is not concerned with the constant acquisition of more and more and more, then this is from the causes of a person becoming beloved to Allah Azza wa Jalla. But also people, all human beings love to covet, love to acquire, love to have. And so when a person is not preoccupied with what people have, with these comparisons, then they also become respected and beloved to all people. Remember that zuhd is more about a state of heart than it is about a bank balance or a type of car or a type of home. It has to do, and as comes in the Quran al-Kareem, that a person may not become overjoyed with what they have acquired, nor overburdened and sad with what has missed them. So a person has a certain ambivalence, a certain distance, a certain lack of emotional concern and investment with what portion of the dunya they acquire. Because ultimately the rizq is portioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person is responsible for taking means, but they cannot in themselves guarantee themselves wealth or guarantee themselves more provision. Furthermore, rizq comes in much more than material wealth. So one person has millions of dollars, but they're tested with a child who is, got a unique health condition. Somebody else is tested with having a huge home and a happy marriage, but they've never been able to have children for their entire life. Another person is tested with less material provision, but you see themselves very happy. So zuhd is to not become concerned with the acquisition or these comparisons, which are very, very common in our time, with the rizq and provision and portion of other human beings. Az-zuhd has been mischaracterized, as I shared, because some people consider it to be to detest the dunya. And I'm going to challenge you, and again, as I shared with you, our discussion here is a discussion of respect, but I'm not imposing this opinion on any of you. In fact, if you disagree, and you go do your own research, I'll be overjoyed. But I am teaching you from what I've been taught, and we engage each other in respect, but each person carries the responsibility for their own journey. But I would challenge you that hating the dunya is just the opposite of loving and coveting it. In both cases, what are you focused on? The dunya. Az-zuhd is not loving and not hating. It doesn't matter. Right? In the hadith, and this hadith has some weakness to it, but there's a saying of the Prophet ﷺ that if the whole dunya had the weight with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the wing of a fly, then a wrongdoer, an oppressor would not drink a glass of water. But this dunya is worthless with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This dunya has no weight. So in this dunya, Allah gives those that He loves and those that He hates. Those that deserve and those that don't deserve. But in the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gives the deserving and those that have earned His love. So why preoccupy oneself with the acquisition of more and more? Zuhd is not, as we said, to falsely kind of, build this distance. And I shared with you before the story of our mother, the mother of the believers, Aisha radiallahu anha, who saw a person kind of like walking through Medina, heavy shoulders, and when his ass was, because he was up at night, all night praying. She didn't praise this behavior, right? This is not it. She talked about Umar radiallahu anhu and how decisive he was in speech and in action. The Prophet ﷺ was described that when he would walk, people would have to kind of rush to keep up. Why? Because he's walking decisively. He has somewhere to be, he has things to do, right? Prophet ﷺ and some of the companions were tested with periods of great poverty. And some of them generally lived large periods of their life poor. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was from Ahl Sufa. The closest thing we could say now is being homeless. He would spend a lot of the time in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, but from that we learned from him a lot. Bilal ibn Rabah was coming from an oppressive system of slavery, right? And it's very hard for people to recover through that. He never became among the most rich people, but he became rich with the recognition and the honor of Islam. He was the first mu'adhin in Islam and one of the great companions. But in terms of a bank balance, some companions had more. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was a multi-millionaire by our standards, as has been mentioned by Uthman ibn Affan. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was extraordinarily rich and lost all of his wealth during an hijrah and rebuilt it through just a very shrewd business person. One of the people described him that he could sell the dust of the desert for a profit. This is not a mentioning of oppression, it's a mentioning of prowess and skill in his craft. But these great companions also, subhanAllah, of the 10 promised paradise, how many entered by the invitation of Abu Bakr? Right? About 6 or 7 of the 10. And he's one, right? So a majority are either him or someone that he invited. Our master Bilal radiallahu anhu was freed by our master Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, right? And so these great people were connected. So these people also had dunya, but used it for good. So a zuhd is not to look disheveled. I remember a story, and a zuhd, like we could take the entire class with stories of. So zuhd is one of those amazing topics where the way you learn it is by reading stories of true applications and by meeting people that have it in our times. And so I want to keep pace, so I'm not going to share as many stories as I could. I'm going to focus on the modern application because I think that the modern application of zuhd is a little different in our context as I share momentarily. Let me give you a modern example. I remember there was, mashallah, well-respected sheikh. He's completed his PhD in Islamic studies, specialization in comparative fiqh, very well-respected scholar. And there was this, kind brother, not in this community, another community. And this brother was actually very rich. This brother had a business and some ventures, did very well on, he was a millionaire. He used to always, and mashallah, he was very regular in salah. So he used to always come into the masjid with the same shirt. Always in the same shirt, and it was a worn shirt, right? Just these standard dress shirts, but it was worn and beaten, and it was always the same one. This really kind of blew me out of the water. Should have built a relationship with this person, and he started reviewing with him, why are you always wearing the same shirt? He said, you have millions of dollars, you've been very successful. Don't boast among people, don't walk with your nose on the mouth, but this ni'mah that Allah has given you should show in your appearance, and it's not. So a zuhd is not to cast out the dunya onto the ground. It's not to have this artificial hatred. It's to truly separate oneself from concern of it and to use it in what's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why some of these great companions, actually including Abu Hurairah, they had periods of wealth. One of the biggest misunderstandings of the Prophet ﷺ is that the Prophet ﷺ was poor. This is absolutely untrue. The Prophet ﷺ worked for pennies during a period of his life. During the time when he was tending sheep, he was given very, very little monetary compensation for it. He was a very noble person of high lineage, but his tribe were not thieves, like some of the other noble tribes of Quraysh. And so he lived during periods where he did not have vast amounts of wealth. When he worked for the mother of the believers, Khadija radiallahu anha, when he married her, she was much more wealthy than he was, in both contexts. Both when he started working with her business, and when they married, she was much more wealthy than he was, alayhi salatu wassalam. But the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam later in life had immense wealth, but the wealth never had any lasting existence in his house. So for example, when he has animals between two mountains, that's like having a fleet of cars. But he almost instantly sees somebody that's attached to it, so he gives it to him, and this person goes back to his people. You understand the difference? So when he died, alayhi salatu wasalam, there was not a lot of wealth in his house because he didn't keep it. Because he was constantly giving and spending in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sacrificing. But he knew what it meant to be poor, and he knew what it meant to have capacity to be extremely rich. And this is one of the real disservices that we do learning of Islam. Sometimes in our Sunday school or weekend school, we have this fantasy in our heads that all the companions were poor and, forgive me, we act like they're rejects and they had nothing else but Islam. This could not be further from the truth. The companions, particularly the companions that Prophet ﷺ made the initial da'wah to, poor and rich, were all distinguished. If you're lazy, you weren't good in Jahiliyyah, you didn't get an invitation. You wait till your turn. You understand what I'm saying? The early companions, including the rich ones, were all very, very distinguished people before Islam. Hard workers, focused. Sure, some of them are stuck in slavery. Sure, some of them don't have money, but they're distinguished people. You notice Abu Hurairah, very, very poor during much of his life, but look how many ahadith he memorized from the Prophet ﷺ. He wasn't sitting around saying, I don't have a home, I'm sorry for myself. In the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, learning, connection, he used all this time, and we're indebted to him and other companions. So notice that they were distinguished by their hard work, by their accomplishment, by their sharp mind, by their dedication. Some of them were rich, some of them had less material provision. But each of them had this capacity for az-zuhd. So a person that has been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rizq or provision or so on should not artificially cast it away uselessly, because dunya is also the tool of the believer. We invest time, we invest money to work good into our communities. Okay? But one should not be coveting it or attached to it. Practical tip for zuhd in our times. One of the big challenges with zuhd is that our pop culture and media promote artificial comparison. I used to think Facebook was bad, and then I was introduced to Instagram. You're literally getting snapshots of the best. It's not even a second. It's a fraction of a second of people's lives. And in that moment, it's very, very easy to see them walking across that graduation stage and to not see the long nights and, all the monetary arrangements and the difficulty and so on that it took for Allah to bless them with that. You see them and their big smiles on their wedding day and all these beautiful, shots and flowers and so on and so forth. And you don't know that that person actually, they had tried to get married 5 times before and the courtship didn't work. But it was private. You see that person cradling that child for the first time, and that innocence of a new human life. But that picture is deceptive. You don't know that their first child is actually buried in the cemetery because they had a miscarriage. Because that's not going to make it to Instagram. You feel like you have enough. Actually, you woke up perfectly fine. You have the provision for your day. You have a stocked fridge, full stomach. You had a full night of sleep. There's no bombs, alhamdulillah, dropping around us. There's no insecurity until you saw that commercial. Turns out that 12 months is too long to go without a phone upgrade. And so now there's a new phone with more megapixels, even if your eye can't distinguish them, because you don't have that sharp of eyesight. But still, there's more megapixels. That must mean something. It has a faster processor and this and that, and all of a sudden, we want it. We didn't know that we wanted it, but now somebody told us we want it. In my mind, the struggle of zuhd in our times is shaped by these forces, which are not new forces, but they're presented in a different way. One of the problems is they're presented at a much higher volume and much greater speed than ever before. So if I used to compare against the biggest house in my neighborhood, now I can watch a reality TV show called Big Fancy Houses. I don't know if that's a show, please don't look it up. But there's a bunch of shows, whatever they're titled, that are just about that. Life of the luxurious and rich and famous. So now I get to compare against the richest people in existence, not in my neighborhood. Oh, and not just that. Remember what we said about media, right? So you're seeing the view of a little camera. You don't see that there's a director, a producer, a screenwriter, and a person that's doctoring the whole thing. So they tried it. They're like, yeah, here's my house. No, that's not going to smile and open yourself and do it. It's theater. Theater needs a director. So I'm looking at an artificial picture. Now it's really easy for me to talk about that now. It's really hard to have a well-done marketing campaign and so on and moderate the effect on the heart. One of the things that a person does to moderate this is to get out of their bubble and connect with people that have less. I have taken a long time just wrapping my own mind around this, so honestly, I'm going to give you some very direct advice today. I think that for many of us that are living in relative comfort, living in Raleigh, or Cary, or Apex, or Morrisville, or and you're in relative comfort compared to so many others, I literally think that means that you need to get out and get uncomfortable. You need to get a personal experience where you or someone you care about experience, some form of what this dunya is about, some oppression, some inequality, to get out and do a Habitat for Humanity and build a house for someone that couldn't have afforded that house without that time. To go to Project Downtown and support and actually see people for whom this meal is a big deal and they wouldn't eat this well if some people hadn't put some effort to do that, right? To get out of the comfortable neighborhood and to go to an event in a less privileged neighborhood. To talk to people, to understand, to connect with refugees, not just here's the material, but to talk to them where they came from. You know how many people, subhanAllah, that you see working in local service jobs and so on actually have immense wealth overseas but are cast out of their work due to oppression. I remember, subhanAllah, a really honorable older gentleman, Muslim gentleman, I'd be pleased to God bless him and his family. He serves the community in a very basic service job, kind of hourly job. But if you didn't talk to him, you wouldn't know that actually he spent his whole life building extremely successful businesses. And actually has houses in multiple cities in his home country. Not fancy, not luxurious, but just comfortable. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him this wealth, he took it upon himself to connect with others. So actually for 20 years, until the government stopped him, because sometimes the Muslim majority government just stop good works, he sponsored iftar at the local masjid for the entire like the entire village, entire area, for 20 years, Mondays and Thursdays. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him and he gave him that. And he set up his children for real success. And then the Syrian war and current strife and hardship happened. And his children are scattered across the world. And at an age where he should have 2 feet up, retired after working very hard his whole life, he has to work by the hour to just move along in the last years of his life. That experience, like I'm the first to recognize my own privilege. I haven't been tested with anything like that. But I also didn't hear about that on the news. I was sitting in front of him, watching the pores on his skin. And let me tell you, when I say that story, I'm mad. I'm upset with that oppression. I'm frustrated. Because I didn't read about it. So part of the zuhd, really, my humble estimation, this is advice, right? I'm not telling you the Prophet said this is my best effort. You take it and fly with it. Take it somewhere better. But I think in our time, since so much popular media and so on is showing us the best of somebody else's life, we literally have to get out of our seats and see what life is really handing out to some people. Not just life, by the way, but some of the privileged and the wrongdoers, and not just the people at the head of state, what some people are doing to their neighbors that's against our core values in our community. I think that's a big part of zuhd in our times. Like I said, zuhd is such an important topic. Take the entire class, but I want to pause before we move to our case study and take any quick questions or comments. Again, I'm going to ask you, inshallah, to just be very focused and concise, inshallah, with any questions or comments you want to say about Hadith 30 or 31 before we enter case study, inshallah.
On Hadith 30 at the end, you mentioned the idea that we should not, basically we should stay out of the business of others, which was very interesting interpretation for me, because I thought that maybe that Hadith was referring to the things that are considered ghaib, that that we as humans will never know about.
You're talking about the end of Hadith number 30. One interpretation of this is asking excessively about the ghaib, but in fact, many of the interpretations of the ulama broaden this to asking about things that would cause additional burden or hardship but are not directly beneficial. So we gave the easy example of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One of the most direct examples is the man who addresses the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made Hajj as an obligation. So the man asks him every year. Prophet ﷺ is silent. Then the man repeats it. And a third time, the Prophet ﷺ affirms that if he were to say yes, it would become an obligation and they wouldn't be able to. We wouldn't be able to handle it. So this example essentially is an example of the time of the Prophet. Now, applying it in our times is asking that type of question. Asking a question that is purely meant to embarrass or argumentative in nature without a practical, or asking about that which cannot be applied, right? Asking about things that are so theoretical and so out of this world as to not have a practical implementation or a benefit. This type of question could be considered one of the applications of this. In the Deconstructing Doubt seminar, which is supposed to be today, but it didn't work out with the area MSAs, we actually go through 15 types of disliked or prohibited questions. So Imam al-Shatibi and others talk about, classify essentially types of haram or disliked questioning. I've alluded to it briefly in this class before, but these are a few examples, inshallah, that could be considered connected to this hadith. Great question. Other questions? You believe whose fasting is prescribed to you as it is prescribed to those before you. But remember, the Quran is not coming down at one time. For the experience of the companions, right? And this comes in Surah number 25 and in other surahs, Surah Al-Furqan. But the companions are not experiencing the Quran as a whole book at once as we experience it. The Prophet ﷺ is being given revelation sequentially, right? And so the fast of Ramadan itself and the revelation of this verse comes at a particular time. It doesn't come during year 1 or year 2 of the Hijrah. Understand? Just like اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق comes. This is not a scholarly opinion. This is not differed upon. This is evidenced by the Quran itself, right? In Surah Al-Furqan, أو لولا أنزل عليه القرآن جملة واحدة. They say this is one of the arguments of the kuffar. If only the Quran would be revealed to him all at once. So the Quran in itself affirms that it was not revealed all in one shot. It was revealed in groups, sometimes a whole surah, sometimes a set of verses, over the 23 years. Okay, so similarly, the verses that bring obligations also came sequentially. And so during different times of the Prophet ﷺ's life, come differently. I don't mean, by the way, that all of fasting did not come during this Medina period. I mean the fast of Ramadan, which according to most scholars came during the second year of the Hijrah. But essentially the verse that you talked about, when it was revealed, is when Ramadan. No, I'm saying the fast of Ramadan was not obligatory in this manner upon Muslims. You're correct that the idea of fasting existed before. But the fast, even with Muslims, the idea of fasting existed before. But the fard of fasting Ramadan came with this verse in a second. Is that clarified? Good, great question. Any other questions? Yes.
Alhamdulillah, in connection to what Imam mentions about being in our comfort zone, so experience what the less privileged are going through. The Lighthouse Project, which is dedicated to the breadwinners, the last of them are the best person in paradise. So it's one of the ways you can experience such by going out and helping out and, inshallah, participating in such projects. A fundraising is going to take place on the 31st, and I'm going to pass out a flyer so that you can come in and experience what's going on, and inshallah, see where you can actually have an input into experiencing, getting out of our comfort zone to experience those who are less privileged, inshallah, and I'll make it easy. So I'm going to pass this around, and inshallah, let's mark the date and calendar. If we can make it, inshallah, Allah will give us the benefit of that. So,
Jazakallah khairan. Any other questions or comments? Several of the question was about going back to Hadith of Salman. Several of the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ talk about giving every party their due right. And there are slightly different and complementary wordings, for example, giving one's family a right, one's spouse a right, one's children, etc., etc. In the narration of Salman al-Farisi, which is one of these, the giving of the rights is categorized into three. Giving the rights of God, the rights of one's family, and the rights of oneself. And I was suggesting that this particular one doesn't mean that we don't have other rights to give to workplace, to this, to that, and so on. But this particular hadith is very helpful in us in thinking about these priorities, because these are the parties that follow us to our grave, right? Or follow us to our deathbed, I should say, right? Sometimes a person's PhDs and medical degrees and so on are not going to be very relevant at their deathbed, but these, what one has accomplished with these three will be very relevant. No, it's different times where the Prophet ﷺ was asked a question and he answered in this way, that giving each party their due right. It's a recurring theme. So it's not different narrations of the same hadith. It's actually different incidents during the time of the Prophet ﷺ where he reiterated the same lesson about giving every party their due right. And it's connected to this hadith in terms of prioritization. In fact, one of the very important areas of fiqh, and this has become more prominent as a category, is fiqh al-awlawiyat, the understanding of priorities in deen, so that a person can prioritize what's most important and put behind it what's less important. Great question. We have time for one more question. question was about the voluntary fast of Sha'ban. And Sha'ban was one of the months where the Prophet ﷺ did fast more than other months. But also the scholars restricted this to the idea of those that are used to the pattern of voluntary fasts. And so particularly during the first half of Sha'ban, up to the 15th, a person can encourage themselves to observe the voluntary fast, get the body in the mode for Ramadan. And one of the ways you can help yourself in this is by accountability, right? And so if I'm accountable to a friend, probably going to take it more seriously than if just a commitment to myself. If I'm accountable to a mentor or teacher that's following up with me, I'm probably going to be more accountable than with a friend. If I write it down and put it on my door or on the fridge or on whatever, I'm going to make it more accountable. So the way we can encourage ourselves to observe voluntary fasts is to build that accountability, right? Just like a person that's trying to train for running a marathon or any other goal, like boost your accountability, inshallah, that will encourage you to observe it more, along with the encouragement, inshallah, of seeing these words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the second half of Sha'ban, a person should not excessively fast outside of what they're used to fasting. So if a person is regularly in the pattern of fasting Monday and Thursday, then you can continue that. You know, another pattern of fasting, you can continue that. But right at the end of Sha'ban, before Ramadan, general scholars advise not to overfast so the person doesn't enter Ramadan exhausted. A person that's in the habit is ready to do that. If you're not in the habit, actually focus now. In Rajab, first part of Sha'ban, first time you do it, you're going to get this horrible headache. It's better that you get it now than you get it during prime time during the first of Ramadan. You see what I'm saying? Otherwise, you're going to send a text on the first night of Taraweeh, and you say, if I, bench press 500 pounds, will I get the same reward as Taraweeh? Because that'll be easier in your mind, right? Because the body's going to be so heavy. So go through that difficulty now. Like if you haven't fasted in a while, make a goal, fast next Monday, fast whatever, and it's going to be a little difficult. But now that difficulty is outside prime time. You see what I'm saying? During Ramadan, so much reward. So who wants to spend the first 3 fighting this horrible headache and feeling too tired to do anything, right? Get that out of your system now. Don't be discouraged if you haven't fasted in a long time. And by the way, sometimes also we go through life experiences. Some of us haven't fasted because we've been going through a difficult health period or something. Even if we had that intention, that's fine. So inshallah, try to do whatever you're able to do now. So now inshallah, we're going to have a case study, inshallah. So maybe take one for every third person. Okay, so share this piece of paper with 3 people, please. So 1 person in the middle. So only take it for every third person. Only 1. Yes. This case study is not easy. It is also not fake. So I encourage you to take it with the seriousness, as if the people that were affected by this were really here, because they really do exist and this really happened. As we're passing it out, I'll also read it in case, inshallah, anyone on the live stream can participate with us, inshallah. Actually, what we're going to do first is count off. So we're going to count off 3s. So like 1, 2, 3. So go ahead and count your number out loud. 1. 1. 2. 3. 1. Okay, so don't forget your number and don't get up yet. How about 4, 5, 6? 4. 6. 5. Guys, we can't hear, so I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 4, If you forgot your number, may Allah Azza wa Jal forgive you. In front of you, you're looking at a letter. This letter was a response. It's a response to 3 tenants in New York City of Latino descent who are actually in a 200 apartment complex owned by this company, 261 Realty LLC, owns the entire building with the 200 apartments. And actually 261 Realty is a big real estate presence in the area, so they own hundreds of other apartments as well in New York City. These particular 200 apartments are infested. They're in very bad disrepair. They have rats and rodents, water, insects, and for months they have been putting in repeated repair requests, and they go unanswered. So finally, after saying that if the repair requests did not get answered, 3 of these tenants, right, Ahmed, Bilal, and Fatima, received this letter under their doorsteps. This letter is from Steve, the owner of 261 Realty LLC, and he put this under the doorsteps of Ahmed, Bilal, and Fatima, who live in 3 of these apartments. As you can see, it says, who can read it?
6304, dear tenant. As you know, the United States government, specifically the Homeland Security Administration, is investigating illegal aliens in the United States. Recently, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, has contacted and is investigating the tenants of all my property. I've given them all the information that I know about my tenants, age, name, work, cars, marriage, country of origin, telephone numbers, children, etc. From what I can tell you, you should expect a visit from one of these organizations in the near future.
So, each of them got this under their individual apartments. But all 3 of them, when they spoke to each other, they found that they had gotten the same letter. In fact, the reason they got the same letter is because the letter was placed under all 200 apartments. They don't know that yet, but I'm telling you that. The question in front of you in this case study is, what would you do to Ahmed, Bilal, and Fatima come to your masjid, which you're serving at, and present this issue to you? They're asking for help. What would you do? All 3 of them, by the way, are undocumented. All 3 of them are undocumented. So what would you do? They don't have documented, that's right. They don't have documented. Does everyone understand the issue? Any questions?
Are you, when they come to you at the mosque, are you someone just who happens to be standing in the lobby, or are you an officer of the mosque?
Oh, you're all officers today. You're all responsible. The committee. Don't you dare say, "Oh yeah, you can go talk to the imam." Now, that will be difficult on so many levels. Today, you're the imam, you're the officer, you're the president, you're anyone that you want to be that has to deal with this. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can you define what undocumented is generally? What does that entail?
It entails that they are in a legal status in terms of they're paying tenants, they're up to date on the rent and so on. But in terms of their presence in the United States, there may be challenges, and particularly, so I'm looking at this broadly, that they could be undocumented or some of them were not sent. So it's not true about the 200, that they're not documented. But among them, some of them are US citizens, born, some of them are naturalized citizens, some of them are green card holders or on some type of work card, and some type are undocumented, right? So they have some challenge in terms of legal status.
We have to have all 200 of them?
It's up to you. That's part of your discussion.
What kind of help are they looking for?
They, because of the language barriers and because of their particular, this is a relatively low income area, and because of their particular professions, they're actually very unsure what to do. They're just scared. So these particular three actually just really don't know what to do. So part of the key part of your discussion is to analyze what would you do, including if you'd ask questions, if you go out, you just outline those questions. They're very important. Okay? Yeah, you can. That's what you want to do. Okay, we want one last question. They live in New York. Your masjid has recently expanded to New York. So in this classroom back here, we have group 1. Then on this corner with the open door, we have group 2, group 3. Up here you have 4, 5, and in the classroom we have group 6. Okay, so again it's going that way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make sure in your group somebody is taking notes and somebody is responsible for presenting. So you have, inshallah, 10 minutes to figure this out. If you need more copies of the sheets, there's more up here.
I have this thing, quite some time I thought I can bring it and let you test it.
Yeah. We can use both, Uncle.
$200. Yeah, we can use one.
So like some of them might have families, some of them might be like married. So I think we should kind of like group them into like different I guess demographics or like how they're living, and then tackle each like this. Or like single people, I guess they don't like people with families have like a bigger obligation, I guess, towards their like kids and things. So I think maybe you might want to prioritize public transport. I think that's right. Yeah.
How did they become one? Overstep. People have obligations. We have an obligation to them to help whatever we have the obligation to help them with as a Muslim. Second is, we also have an obligation to them. So, my opinion is, first and most important is we need to understand our obligation. What are the rules of engagement? The minimum I think that I can come away with is we need to make sure that we get correct advice. And for one of us is the law, we are thinking we can still follow, she can still follow, or not. The minimum we need to do is let them do the other thing, because they didn't have no clue what that is.
Answer the smoking.
They could be arrested, they could be evicted, they could be deported. Well, if they are not properly documented.
You're obviously demanding, right? The question is real or is it right? So this is coming at a time when a lot of complaints and those complaints are fulfilled. They're not being responded to. So is this just a way to shut up the text? And then we need to make sure that the line stays the way it is. So obviously you're in a state of, you know, so you're in a state of disadvantage. Obviously legal reform, you have legal aid or something like that. But also if there are 200 people, there's a very disadvantaged point. One thing that that's found in help is the numbers, right? And so then finding out what else is going on with other people, and then finding out if there are ways to fix it. This is just a matter of the landlord fight that is necessary.
First and foremost, the issue here is document. This guy, until everything was fine, he has harbored as long as it is convenient for them. And he doesn't say that he has just voluntarily, looks like he has just voluntarily got it.
Well, again, based on this letter and based on the people walking, I would say this, I have no idea, to your point, what's really going on. I'll be very frank and honest with you. These three people who walk in could be lying to us. I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying that we have to take that into account. Secondly, this is 100% true, something is going on, and you're right, there's pressure going on. So we need to provide them legal assistance. We need to provide them any legal assistance we can. Maybe they're in financial dire situation, maybe they got frustration. And then maybe we need to reach out to some group and say, let's go forward with everyone.
So it wasn't just
Real
those who were complaining.
there's a bigger issue here that we need to bring up as a social justice platform. But in doing all of that, because I'm the officer of the mosque, because I cannot be the officer of the mosque, I also have to make sure that I don't my mosque at thoroughly legally. Because there, one of the requirements of the law is that if you know something and you don't disclose it, you're asked about it. You also have to know. I'm not saying don't do anything. I think there's a process of sequence of
as
We're going to take another 3 minutes, inshallah, during which time we'll extend by 3 minutes, but you have to identify a spokesperson, inshallah. We'll end in 3 minutes.
But I think if you're putting notes together, like what exactly you want to do as different points.
Yes, we on one option we don't have one partner. It's not that does I think that's the real issue. That does happen. People just and they are completely ignored or misdirected or basically going to go elsewhere.
First of all, try to investigate, see what exactly the problem is.
We can apply them to
So we want to investigate before we redirect to
Or use legal help. Yeah, that's
with a lawyer who is fully live up their rights.
and I would say another comment is I think solution is a much bigger issue going to get that we can really help this just two or three people we can give us how we can go about doing it.
Not all 200 people are.
We actually don't really know that they just came to us because they don't know what's going on.
Okay, 30 seconds, inshallah. Make sure you've appointed a spokesperson.
Because they only talk to each other, so they don't know that. It's not like that's all they're doing. You just have to see
So now the officers are telling the chief officer. That's right, all the responsibility.
Okay, let's find our way back to the seats. I know there's still ongoing conversation, but we'll finish it up as a group.
How are you? Very good.
Alrighty.
I'm not supposed to. Thanks.
How did you find that?
That was intense.
Yeah, it's intense, right? It's not easy. And no part of that is made up other than just the names and the institution. I know I didn't give you much. In reality, these three people belong to the South Bronx Church in New York City. And I didn't give you much more than what they presented with, which was that there were three people don't belong to a large congregation. Each group should have a spokesperson. Please be ready so we stay efficient, inshallah. But I'm going to ask you to share one part of your plan, inshallah, so that we don't repeat, because I know there's going to be several things that several of you came up with. So we'll start with group number 2. What's one part of your plan? No, you can.
Okay, so our group kind of looked back at a real world situation that occurred in this area. So in Greensboro, there was someone seeking sanctuary in a church as well. So we were looking at how the masjid could be a safe space and addressing things like housing and because they don't live in good housing conditions, and as well as introduce some access to legal services, especially when addressing language barriers and the contract that they have with the house.
Okay, good. So you're talking about an actual kind of connected experience, the issue of sanctuary, masjid, or place of worship. Great. Do I have your permission to push back on you all so we can grow? Are you sure? I'm saying, as I hear responses, you mind if I push back so we can grow and expand? Because I know it's a short time, but we're trying to grow together. You know how many people have talked about the concept, not this group, I'm saying in general, and outside of a case study, for real, like people come up to me and talk about the concept of sanctuary masjid in the last 4 years? More than I can count. Do you know how many people took that to a level to figure out how in the biggest target in the southeast United States of them Muslims that everybody's after, to actually figure out a foolproof way to figure out all the legal, compliance, facilities, cleaning, and everything else so that when that proposal comes up to an official, to a shura and so on, that nobody can just legitimately say there's no way we could do this? Now, I'm not judging our community for that. There's a lot going on. I'm not saying that people are bad because they haven't seen that particular work to its completion. But I have a new policy. I've been nice to you all for 4 years, and there's a new policy. If anyone presents me a problem that they're not personally willing to work to solve, then it's not really a problem for them. That's my new policy. If anybody presents a problem that they're not personally willing to solve, then it's not a real problem for them. Why? Because, and again, many people present that issue and don't have the background to do that. That's fine. We're not judging anyone. We're not saying if somebody doesn't do this, then they're not a good person. That's not right. But just as leadership would not judge that person, now that person can't come back and say, you haven't given young people a chance. You don't care about saying, because you're depositing the problem. You're not working on it. If you got a deposit, I've already got this long register of problems. If you're going to wait on me, you'll be waiting on the day until the day of judgment, because there's a long list of problems. But part of this case study is how do we expand our base, because we're part of a large congregation. We can involve the imam, the path, but we don't need to wait on that person. We can involve the officials, but we don't need to wait on them. So I wanted to highlight that because this was a great place to start. As we build on that, let's hear what group number 5 has to add for us. One more piece.
So our first realization is that we can make assumptions about whether it's a threat or whether it's a legal back into this. And so the first thing was make sure that if we can tell our community has a network of people who are engaging in that. Provide them with that legal assistance.
Okay.
Because we may be dealing with this very well.
Okay. Excellent. So point was expanding the network, and particularly a suggestion was made to look for lawyers, maybe lawyers with immigration, because part of this might be legal compliance and challenging the legality of some of this stuff. Right? Does this smell legal to you? Does this smell legal to you? Do you think? I know most of us are not lawyers. Okay, so be careful, because the undocumented piece is a trap. Even if some people have overstayed their stays or so on and so forth, the disclosure of this information is probably very, very illegal. So I hope several of you considered finding a lawyer, particularly that specialization. Where are you going to find that lawyer? Do you think that these people have the money to pay for a lawyer at market rate? Most likely with the situation that I described to you. Do you think that it's likely they have it? Most likely not. So where are you going to find that lawyer? One place is nonprofits, legal aid, like we have Legal Aid MC here, Muslim Legal Fund of America. I'm not hearing one big source. Pro bono in the community. Do you think it's likely that in a large masjid that you have lawyers that would be willing to volunteer their time for a good cause? What's the number one impediment to finding those lawyers? What's the number one challenge to finding those lawyers? You have to be organized. You have to be network communicated, and generally large Muslim congregations are horrendously organized, right? Because you have to get beyond the people that are praying, the people in the school. You have to know what you're doing, and part of what we're trying to do actually in this community is organize our own resources, because we have treasures that are alienated, that don't know that they're good, that don't know their talents are here, and we don't even know the talents of people. So that's a big challenge. It's not a small challenge. That would take a long time, but it's worth doing. That was actually part of the real solution. So thank you very much for this, and I overheard other groups mentioning it as well. You had something there?
We also suggested reaching out to interfaith organizations and building coalitions with other groups don't have to fight this thing.
Excellent, excellent. So the issue of coalitions and working with interfaith partners are also concerned about this. Group number 3. Group number 3, yes.
So I was also in the that mentioned content with other communities and religious groups to create the issue of advocacy, not just an issue that concerns Muslims in general. But before all of that, we talked about letting them know what their rights are, just because we don't want them to fall into the trap before we even let them know.
One more time, the last time.
So like letting them know what their rights are, so like don't open the door, don't make them feel just so they don't fall into the trap or end up in jail before we even know.
Okay, excellent. So particularly, inshallah, some of you people, how do you think they're feeling? Scared? Violated? Right? It's possible that they, with the information I've given you, they probably may have lived abroad or come from a different context. You don't know how long they've been in this cultural system, aware of their role of law enforcement and so on. So teaching them, helping them understand their rights and so on. What's a really important piece related to that on this whole discussion? If you decide you're going to bring the lawyer, if you're going to find you're going to take on this person and so on and so forth, what needs to happen with those 3 people? Go ahead. So it could be that that's one of the outcomes, but I'm thinking about even early on, and this is something that a lot of Muslim organizations get totally wrong. If you're passionate about undocumented, working towards the wrong treatment of people that are in difficult housing conditions, or this issue or that issue and so on, you have to make sure not to bulldoze Ahmed, Bilal, and Fatima in the process. So many Muslim organizations that are concerned with advocating for whatever or this or that important issue forget the part of not exerting power over someone, building ability for them to network is their consent, which means that you have to be okay with them saying no, because it's their issue. So even if they will demonstrate, they will stand up and stand up for people, if they don't want to see the lawyers, then they have that right or no? They do. If they don't want to challenge the such and such, they have that right? Absolutely. So many large, because there's a lot of nonsense going on, and all these issues need to be confronted. Hate crimes, immigration, this and that. But ultimately, when you work locally, you're dealing with people, you have to honor those people's right to consent or to say no. This is a big issue between thought leadership at a convention, which is important, and working with people's lives locally. I personally was part of a conversation, a difficult conversation, where we're having a listening session and we're talking about a real problem in the community. You could see the pain in people's eyes. And a person suggested to do a khutbah about this topic. This was before we had the IR health team formed. And I could see the issues were real. I could see the issues were hurting people. I could see the issue was difficult. I made the decision, to the best of my ability in that time. I said, we have already let these people down. The moment I speak on that minbar, people will present with their issues. We already forgot them. We already weren't there for them. And you had most better believe that when they show up the next time, we're not letting them down again. So the solution is not going to be a sermon at people. It will be building the ability to serve these people, because I'm not speaking at a convention. I'm speaking within a community. People will react. Within the next week, I had prepared the khutbah. But the khutbah was delivered a year later, because that's what it took for 15 people to come to the table, figure it out, and the Imam's initiative on behavioral and mental health until they built out the health team and was approved and supported by our leadership. You see the difference. That issue of consent in a local community context is very, very important. Group 6. Great. Number of good suggestions and solutions. Group number 1. Oh, okay. Wow. Do you mind if I open that up to the group just to see if everyone thinks? Is that okay with you? The suggestion was reaching out to the landlord and seeing what they think and communicating them with them directly. How many people in this room do you think would do that? Raise your hands. No, just honestly, I know this is not just your individual opinion. It's not an easy question. Okay? How many people would not do that? How many people are unsure? How many people did not raise their hands, although we've covered all possible choices in the universe?
I suggest that we always have to go with some legal, whenever we're trying to confront something, it has to be something, because there could be legal complications.
So I'm glad that this idea was suggested, because it's not obvious. The answer is actually not clear and would take specialization that we haven't taken the time to see if it's within the room, right? It's a complicated issue. It's going to be an issue of ijtihad. But it's very courageous and forward-looking in that, can we solve this with a person? But it's also, we have to understand that there are people in the world that are looking to tear you down if you show out from the shadows, right? And so this is a threat. If he knows what he's doing, this is very, very threatening. Therefore, if you reach out and he threatens back, you have to be able to tell what's real or what's fake. He says, I'm going to go after you and your mosque and shut you down. You have to know if that's a smoke screen or if it's real. You have to be able to react. And so I love the suggestion. A very, very nice suggestion. I'm not going to suggest yes or no. I'm going to suggest that would have to be really carefully discussed. Yes?
And you did say that all 210 species.
I did.
I would understand that those people or X number of people may not reach out to the landlord. But what if, as a community tenants, we're going on rights and setting this out, the legal people, if they reach out to him, because
report, they're afraid. They all talk to each other, they find out we all have that.
Absolutely. And that was part of the real solution as well, building that coalition. And in particular, it's intelligent to not put at risk the at-risk tenants. In this particular situation, the tenants that have citizenship work permit are more likely more protected legally than others, and they're all in the same boat. So it's wise to put them out front because but you also have to be able to react to a slumlord. Not necessarily reaching out to him is going to bring the response desired. So I'm not suggesting you shouldn't reach out to him. I'm suggesting in reality they had other steps based on that response. But I'm really glad that you mentioned that because a lot of people would not think about talking to this person. Group number 4.
So, okay, well, since we're the last year, most of the good ideas have been taken, but what we're going to start with was basically like legal advice to like the people who are coming, and then like additionally, some people in our group suggested that like it's possible that like the landlord wasn't being serious, like it's kind of like a threat because so many people have complained about the situation in the apartments that this would be a way just to like shut them down. So another investigation is like I think the sister mentioned like reaching out to the other tenants in the building, but like beyond that, since this is like a network of real estate, you can also try to reach out to other buildings to see if they're facing like the same kind of battle. So beyond like the legal ramifications of what that would entail, you could also help with just like basic monetary supply if they're struggling on that. And some of them might be like at risk of being evicted or things like that. The community or like if there's like a general like a welfare place inside the community that can help them.
Okay. Jazakumullah khairan. And that's not easy to go last, but that's great that you added to our suite of ideas. Does anyone know what actually happened?
Yes.
These people were members of a church, as I said, a large church, who called together a meeting of the tenants, the people in the apartment, and learned that everybody had gotten this letter. And not all of them were in the same citizenship status. So some of them had more ability to challenge more comfortably than others. They also involved their equivalent of the imam, the father, the clergy member of the church, who gathered together the parishioners, like the congregation. And how do you think that they built individual relationship to the problem for people that were not in that apartment building and not going through that struggle directly? How do they think they built awareness in that congregation? So one person said sermon, definitely you could bring it to life. What else? They toured the apartment complex. They took the church members and went and toured the apartment complex to see the leaks and the mold and the cockroaches and the rats and the conditions that had been unfixed for months upon months and months. How do you think people felt? So from that, several of the congregants were lawyers. They started to get engaged in the issue, and they looked at this person. When this person was approached and confronted, he was literally a slumlord, but he was totally unwilling to budge. But then they widened the coalition and the network and found out that some people were connected to the owner of this, that were in the Catholic diocese, like the Catholic structure of the churches. And they got really upset. So his business partners started to call him and say, what is going on? Like the other people in the business community. You know what else they did? It's really brilliant. They reached out to the Housing Commission. And the Housing Commission said there's no way we could investigate this number of apartments. So they told them, you don't have to. Our church members already did on your sheets. You just have to come and verify. They visited, had the sheets ready. All the inspectors had to do is come in, verify all these violations, and they handed them a stack of 200 inspections in apartments. Person started to feel great pressure, but also found out that the other apartments were like this. Was told by the Housing Commission that not just this property, but all the other properties will be shut down of criminal action if it doesn't get this in mind. Within 3 months, the entire building was fixed. Reactions. I'm sorry? Question was, had he actually reported this to the immigration services? You know what the answer to that question is? Nobody ever found out. Actually, truly, the people that I've met, the people that were involved in this action personally, or some people that were connected with them, they actually never found out. Because they were very effective and nobody ever came knocking at the door, so probably he didn't. But there was no definitive proof one way or another. But probably he didn't because no one ever came knocking. But they got the homes fixed and they got these people in respectable conditions.
In the discussion, I mentioned that when any of these officers show up at your door, there's a chance of you being arrested or getting in prison or something like that, you say, I need to talk to my lawyer. Right?
Yeah.
If you don't say anything else,
Absolutely.
you say, I need to talk to my lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your first defense,
Yeah.
whatever your status is. And so, these people showed up at the masjid, like, alhamdulillah, we are pretty much organized to whatever extent. I'm talking about rather masjid, right?
Right.
So, we might have that network already in place where we could have lawyers at our disposal. So when these people contact us, we say, okay, we have lawyers. If you get into this situation, this is the number to call, and we'll connect you to the lawyer. So that way, they have the defense in place. They can continue living in whatever condition they were. But at least they would feel at peace that, okay, we have legal backing just in case we get into that.
Good. No, so that's one definitely an important part of it, and that's why we run kind of know your rights workshops under the leadership and the education committees. Like, it's very important, and that's one part, and that's a big part of the history of the civil rights movement that's not, covered sufficiently in history class. The ability to challenge these issues in court. There's another part here, and you didn't wake up this early in the morning to be comfortable, so to make you a little bit uncomfortable, right? The next 5 hadith are related to different aspects of justice, dealing with people. Communal justice, working for ma'ruf, will define that, forbidding munkar. Why do you think I started that in this most untraditional way? Why? Next 5 ahadith, the whole collection is 40 hadith. Next 5 ahadith are directly connected to issues of justice and dealing and judgment and working and bringing goodness into the world and trying to remove munkar from it. And when you're not able to bring it, still having your heart right. The hadith talk about when you can't bring the change into the world, make sure your heart is not screwed up. Just because oppression is existing in your community, it better not be okay in your heart, even if you're not able to change it. Why do you think I started this way?
Just to illustrate that there's real life consequences to having injustice in your communities and not having that network of people to stand up and push back against it.
Absolutely. Yeah. What else? What
How
else?
to react to those things.
How to react? Good. What else?
I actually was thinking about these ideas and how like they talk about leadership and how the more you are empowered, the more responsibility that you have. So like when you look at justice and kind of responsibility, it's intricate but it's also large scale.
Okay, good. I want to push you guys further. Can I ask the permission from a couple of people actually? Dr. Omar, do you mind if I ask you a question? I'll put you on the spot. You have a lot of family responsibilities, mashallah, Allah bless your children and your career. Why are you here this early in the morning? What brings you to this room? What in your life drives your core to be here space. At this time, it could be someone else.
Make it theoretical, we can make it practical.
Okay.
So these hadith that are there, how do I actually first understand it? How do I actually then take it inside? And then how do I actually practice it?
Okay. Took a look at it. I appreciate you sharing. Ask. Sister Farah, you mind if I ask you a question? At the last Element fundraiser, if it's okay with you, you were sharing, your experience now both being responsible for a large, leading a large school, that several of our teachers and staff members are here as well today, but also your individual experience in being in environments sometimes where you were you so identifyingly Muslim, right? And being the only person observing hijab and the pressure and the words and so on that came with that. Relating on your experience of the young women that graduate from an Iman in 8th grade and move on, how many of them do you think will experience some bias, some discrimination, some word, some experience by the time they're graduating college? How many of them? Probably 100%. Okay. So everyone hear that? 100% of the graduates, right? Especially those that are very visibly Muslim, right, in the public eye, will probably experience that horrible experience, that experience that no one should experience. Probably all of them will go through it in the next 8 years. How does that make you feel? Who wants to share while they're here this morning? Who wants to share why they're here this morning? What brings you here? What drives you? Hadith are a lot about, by the way, inspecting the court. It's not comfortable, it's not easy. What brings you here? What from your childhood? What from your past? What sparks your presence in this place?
Desire to strengthen that connection.
Okay. Great. What else?
That responsibility.
I come because I know, at least like through my experiences, a lot of people really misquote, and because there are so many misconceptions about Islam. So I think for me, it's helpful because I need to understand our religious text to be able to like accurately defend ourselves instead of just like laugh it off or act like to just I guess address those misconceptions and like, using accurate facts.
more you try to have the next step, even if being complacent, means you don't have to run it.
So now, standing still, you're either moving forward or regressing. One more comment.
I would be defense, but like if you go online, you can find a lot of lectures by Islam that are really, really good. And you can learn a lot about Islam like online. But the reason why I come to this class is that they have to thank other Muslims that are also in the community. I think it's really important.
Excellent. So we've had so many positive, back to Hadith number 1, right? Intention, right? Look how many different angles of positive, of construction, of development that we have on the same space. But honestly, we're coming to the end of the Hadith, and I told you Imam an-Nawawi had this incredible genius in the way he ordered it. Remember in the beginning, we're foundational. We were like, big picture. All these angles, Iman, Islam, Ihsan, all of these. And now we've talked about public, private. What's going to start to happen at the end of the collection? All these ahadith are going to open you up to your responsibility of the community, and then all of a sudden the next hadith is going to be very spiritually focused. You'll be like, wait, I thought we're on community, why are you back in my heart? And then there's going to be cases like judgment, evidence, and then all of a sudden it's like, what are you doing to your community? Why? This is the application. And this was his genius really in ordering the collection, that is going to show us the comprehensiveness of application of what we've learned, right? So they're all intertwined, right? You're not going to bring virtue into the community if you don't have a strong spiritual foundation individually. You're not really living spiritually founded if you don't care that your neighbor is hungry. You're not going to be able to work towards eradicating hunger and poverty and so on if your lens is not grounded. When people around you are doing the right thing, you join the crowd. When people are messed up, you join the crowd. You're not going to be right if the cause is your aqidah. When it's in fad, or when there's news cameras to be environmental or animals, right, you're right there. And when the cameras are gone, you're gone. The hadith, and that's why this section is uncomfortable. And I'm, pushing back on you and pushing on me because it's not my words. This is what we owe to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, words of the Prophet. A lot of people today have assassinated this deen. They have tried to strip the life out of it. That's why young people, I'm not going to mince words with you. Young people are turning to liberalism as a new aqidah. Literally. If somebody does something wrong on social justice, they eviscerate them and so on. And if somebody is distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't care. I'm not saying go police them. I'm not saying go home. But they don't care. What's that mean? It means the heart is not directed the right way. And one of the reasons is because our message and our spaces have alienated people and are found to be irrelevant to life. They're found to be irrelevant to life. So I'm going to give you the best of what I have been taught about these ahadith because I think they deserve nothing less. And that, I'm telling you from now, it will be introspective, it will be uncomfortable, it will be agitating, but it will build true conviction and power if you let it. So I'm just giving you fair warning because this is not, this takes a real presence of heart and mind. Part of this, for me, we'll close with this today, inshallah. As I said, the next 5 are very focused on social justice. We'll start diving into them next week. But part of this is a recognition of how short we've come up in our own responsibility. I'm going to talk to you more about this next time. The difference between service, activity, and organizing. But a lot of people, a lot of young Muslims in particular, are motivated by the activity today. Are motivated, and that's why you can get 100 volunteers for an event, but you can't get 10 people to give you an hour long. I'm telling you right now, if next week was Youth Day and so on, I wouldn't sweat about getting 100 volunteers at the chairs and so on. Easy. I would really have a difficult time getting 10 people to contribute consistently over the next 10 months, those same 10 months. Part of what we have to build, and I'm just spending a long time trying to structure this for our community, so we have a solution. Part of what we're trying to build in one of our initiatives for this year actually, is to train and teach people on the fundamentals of organizing our community and actually structurally making a difference. Now again, I'm going to tell you straight up. That means part of eradicating hunger is making sandwiches and serving, but if you do that alone, you'll be making sandwiches until when? End of time. And some people will become very exhausted, and it needs to keep happening. But part of it is somebody is thinking, how do I change the structure? What you just did, hard, difficult, talented work. The big problem we have in our community is that we're disorganized, we're a mess, and we don't have the skills to do it. So one thing that we're doing, I'll share this again with you next time, we're opening training over April and May. Anyone who wants to dedicate themselves to this, have 2 types of training. One type is going to be on the evening, 7 to 8:30, 3 nights during the month of April. If you commit to that, IAR will sponsor your spot if you're willing to commit to 4 hours of service a month after that for the rest of the year. When I took this training, my local community didn't think I was worth training or any other young person was worth training. So I had to find the money on my own. One reason I'm here with you is because I'm frustrated that our community didn't see the value, not of investing in me, in investing in anybody. So our community was flat-footed when it was time. Or we'll have an opportunity in May, also inshallah, Pasha is sponsoring it, 3 days in a row, with a commitment of 4 hours a month of service and organizing. Talk to you about that more next time, inshallah. I want to plant the seed in your mind. I want to tell you again, that's not what these hadith boil down to. Some of you are serving in other spaces. This is not a judgment of you. This is not status, because this is not the only way to serve. I will particularly be focusing a lot on working with these people for the rest of the year, because our community is lacking people that know how to do one-on-one relational meetings, know how to organize talent, know how to do service lessons. But I'm telling you, if you work with me on this team, the last thing that better be on anybody's mind is quick results and cameras and attention. Because as far as I can tell, Facebook like hasn't ever changed anything in my observation. It's got its space, but it's not change. We're organizing around this change, inshallah. I'll tell you that more next time, inshallah, in the next 5 hadith about social justice. And I appreciate your presence, inshallah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can keep it.